so deep into it. I didn't even think that. It doesn't move easily.
Not the same thing. Not the same. I'm going to try to hold it by it. This is always there's speech there.
And Mr. Lowisher, the new group have to sit up front. Mr. Carrier, have a seat up here. I have somebody up front.
By the way, we just received a second submission. Yes.
I just thanked them for submission.
There's two of them now.
Okay, folks, good evening. I can't believe how pleasant it is weather-wise here tonight. The drive from Charlottetown is not that terrific, but why would I be surprised at anything but beautiful setting Murray Harbour, where I spent a significant amount of my youth, particularly in the summers. My mother was, as they say, a White from Murray Harbour, and I'm named after my grandfather, Horace White. In fact, my first cousin, Jeff White, lives in the family homestead through the Murray Harbour Cemetery on the point there, Point Lane. And so I spent a lot of time, and a few years ago, when our kids were a little bit younger, we would come down and once or twice in the summer and drive along the place. And finally, after the first time we were doing that, and the kids had sort of appreciated, things were going a little slow, they said, "Mommy, why is Daddy driving so slow?" Okay? Because he's driving down memory lane. Okay? Anyway, last night in North Restico, we tried something a little different. This is Evan McDonald, and Evan is from Kensington, and he works with the Department of Municipal Affairs, and he's a geographer. Now, I'm sure you're, like me, surprised that we have a geographer in the government. Anyway, that's what he is, and he started a summer student every year, and he's still there. But he is the gentleman who's been responsible for printing these maps here. And there's a little package that you've been given, and it has some details about that. And he has also been looking a little bit at certain sections of the island about non-resident ownership. So we're going to look at three sections tonight, and one is this area here. Okay? One is up west, and where's Alvin Keenan? And one is your neck of the woods, way up east. Okay? And I think we'll do the Murray Harbour one not only first, but we may even run it a couple of times. And Evan, would you like to just say a few little words of narrative before you start, please? So we are doing up east.
We're going to start Murray Harbour.
Okay, it's just I saw Monticello. Got a little concerned. Maybe my geography was off base.
Okay, so this video here will start roughly at Wood Islands at the ferry terminal along the shore and be coming in towards Murray Harbour.
I should say that the area in red, no significance, or purplish pink. Go ahead, Evan.
The area in red those are non-resident owned properties. So about 32% of the coastline between Wood Islands and Murray Harbour North, if you come in around the harbour and out, is owned by non-residents. And a lot more land also owned in from the coast a bit too. So that's coming into Murray Harbour here now. In terms of the whole island, about 18% of the PEI's coastline is non-resident owned, but if you know PEI, there's a lot of offshore islands and dunes systems that take up a lot of the coastline that wouldn't really be livable anyways. So it's a fairly large number. So this is coming out the Peters Road here. So that's that section. I went through and I actually slowed that video down, so I think you can catch most of that. And the next video will show Eastern Kings down to about St. Peter's Bay. And this would be one of the most densest stretch of non-resident land on PEI for sure. There's a lot of big fields, 50 or 100 acres, coming in from the North Shore and down to the road. So that just started off in East Point. That's North Lake here.
But you can't tell the difference between cleared land and woodland though, can you?
I couldn't find that out. That's one thing that I'll be working on, is finding out how much of that's agriculture, how much is woodland.
See it a bit.
When you say non-resident,
Yeah,
is that current or is that time of purchase?
this is current as to this month. So if a property on the island is owned by anyone from off island that doesn't live here 183 days a year, then it's going to show up red. I didn't do that area yet.
We managed to get through North Rusko without one such comment, but tonight,
So along that stretch, 45% of the coast is owned by non-residents. And a lot of those are huge properties. Now this will start up at North Cape and go all the way down to Cascambeck Bay, down around Foxley River.
48, 49%. There are a lot of properties up there, but you also have to know there are two large areas, islands plus the peat
Peat moss, or
Peat
peat
moss.
bog, peat bog down there.
peat bog.
So this is a little different than the Surrey area because you see a lot more subdivision here, smaller lots, maybe 1 or 2 acres. That stretch of dunes and island there is owned by a man from Halifax. And those are fairly big parcels there. Like, I don't know the whole size of that stretch there, but I'm thinking between 500 and 1,000 acres.
Sure. Would you like to see this area one more time? No? Okay. Maybe if we got time at the end of the evening, we'll run it again. And the little handout that we've passed out, these are the terms of reference to have myself appointed as a land commissioner. Last September, the government had an ad in the paper and invited people to apply for this position. And it's a review of the Lands Protection Act. 30 years after it was passed, and so I filled the application, sent a letter off, and went on holidays, and came back, and I found out that I had been appointed. And the inquiry is conducted under the Lands for the Lands Protection Act. It's conducted in the Public Inquiries Act, which has a lot of power and authority, but just because you have power doesn't mean you have to use it. And so we could have very formal settings. You have to make briefs and presentations and so many days in advance and all that type of stuff, and be sworn, give testimony, and I can subpoena evidence of people and documents, but I'm not doing any of that, at least yet. And what I'm trying to do is have as many hearings places across the province. So when this is all completed, I think it'll probably, we've got 14 either held and more scheduled, like a total of held and scheduled. But I think there's a strong probability we may go an extra one in Charlton, just because there seems to be a fair number of presentations that people want to make. So if we look in the center of this section, it directed me to examine, inquire into, and report. Did everybody get one of these? You did, okay. Excuse me, to inquire and examine and report regarding 1, the adequacy of existing aggregate landholding limits given changes in agriculture, provincial land use, and ownership trends in rural communities. 2, options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. 3, legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as landholding limits as they apply to utilities, application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners, and the information and deeming requirements for non-profit corporations. And any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. When this, we've had land laws in this province for 150, 160 plus years. We all know the history of absentee landlords and this province and tenant farmers, that whole situation. And then at one time, if you were an alien of Canada, a foreigner of Canada, if you wanted to buy more than 200 acres of land, you need Executive Council approval. In the 60s, that was lowered to 10 acres. And then in the early 70s, became really active. And it was 10 acres, 5 chains, or 330 feet along the water for corporations. And then our government came in power, Angus MacLean, and then May of 1979, and shortly thereafter, in a year or so, Special Legislative Agricultural Committee was set up at the House. Gordy Lank was the chair, and it had hearings, heard representations, and 18 recommendations came forth, and there was general acceptance on all sides of the House. And what we did is we introduced the Lands Protection Act, and that was passed in May of 1982. Now, all of that would have been for naught if the federal government of Pierre Trudeau had gotten his way, because when he decided after he was re-elected in 1980 to bring the Constitution home, he decided he wasn't just going to bring the Constitution, the amending formula home, it was going to have certain things added to it before it came back from London, including the right for any person in this country to own land, own property anywhere. Okay? And our government took a very strong position on that. I ended up having an off-the-cuff debate with the Prime Minister that was, well, I was only 31 and perhaps not wise enough to realize what I was doing, but at the time I wasn't that nervous, but afterwards I shook for days. In any event, the net result of that exchange and some other things that happened is when there was finally an agreement or consensus among all the provinces minus Quebec in November of 1981. By that time, this provision, which was very offensive to the government here, was removed. Now, those that don't like the Lands Protection Act said, oh, what a shame, too bad you won that particular round. On the other hand, if we hadn't, we wouldn't be here. We would have no Lands Protection Act whatsoever. And the right under the Constitution, which we received in 1867, to be able to deal in the province with the matter of property and civil rights would have been basically worthless. However, in 1998, this section, the next piece of paper, was added. And Premier Binns' government, and we're pretty close to his neck of the woods here, had this particular section put in the Lands Protection Act. And it's highly unusual in statutes to find a written statement of what the purpose of the legislation is. Because courts take the point of view, the words in the statute should speak for themselves. So this is a section here, and this is what it says. So the purpose of this act is to provide for the regulation of property rights in Prince Edward Island, especially the amount of land that may be held by a person or corporation. This act has been enacted in the recognition that Prince Edward Island faces singular challenges with regard to property rights as a result of several circumstances, including A, historical difficulties with absentee landowners, and the consequent problems faced by the inhabitants of Prince Edward Island in governing their own affairs, both public and private. The province's small land area and comparatively high population density, unique among the provinces of Canada, and the fragile nature of the province's ecology, environment, and lands, and the resultant need for the exercise of prudent, balanced, and steadfast stewardship to ensure the protection of the province's ecology, environment, and lands. Now, when this act was passed in 1982, it was radically different in its application than it is today. At that time, if you were a farming corporation, you didn't have to apply for IRAC approval. You didn't have to do anything like that whatsoever. Your lands weren't identified. And you just had to indicate you were a farm corporation. Along the line, that all changed. And if you became incorporated, then the lands were put in the incorporation, you're automatically identified, and you were treated no differently than if you were a non-resident corporation. One of the things that our government did was up until 1980, you couldn't tell who the shareholders of the corporation were. You could tell who the directors were. So we amended the Companies Act. So it's compulsory to indicate at the time of incorporation, as well as in the annual returns, who the shareholders are. And those of you who are incorporated, you know that you pay $30 a year and all that type of stuff, and so forth. So I've done enough talking in my part, and what I would, I think I'll start off with this. Has anyone taken the time to make a little preparation of a document or anything tonight, and you'd like to present it? If you have, I'm going to hear from you now, and if not, we're just going to carry on. Now, Mr. Carey, I've not only received one presentation from you, I've received two. So is there anything you'd like to present to us tonight, or you'd like to listen for a while and then chat?
I just have a question about why should the farmers be limited to certain lands? Because years ago, there were many.
You can't hear. No. Okay. Look, why don't you come over here? See, I'm just going to push in the front row, and then you're just speaking to me. Okay?
Well, I'm interested to know why the province finds it necessary to limit agricultural undertakings to this 1,000 and 3,000 acres. Because if we look at the maps of the province 100 years ago, there were many large farms, and the farming community, I think, should be encouraged to have much more land. That's what I'd like to find out. I'd like to get the views of others.
The mic's not turned on, sir. Turn up the mic. We can't hear you. That was my fault again, I guess. Well, you know, there are a number of people in this room and at various other meetings that they're awfully pleased if you ask that question. Well, first of all, I'm not here to defend the status quo, and I'm not here to attempt to get consensus, although I would be pleasantly surprised that that should happen as a result of these issues. But in the late 1970s, there was significant concern about what we would call vertical integration and processors getting involved in lands and so forth. And there were strong representations made to the Legislative Committee. And at that particular point in time, the legislature, with the strong input of the Conservative government, said 3,000 acres limit for 3 equal shareholders in a corporation, and an individual who wasn't incorporated would be 1,000 acres. Now, the most important thing about, in my opinion, what happened, that's one of the most important things, was that for the first time there were restrictions for individuals who were resident in the province, and 1,000 acres, and that's what it was. Those limits have not changed since 1982, with 1 or 2 other matters have happened that some would argue there has been a change. Like, for example, at the time, not only did you count ownership lands, you counted leased-in lands, but you were able to deduct those lands you leased out. In the 90s, you couldn't deduct the leased-out lands. You had to count the leased-in and your ownership, but you couldn't deduct. They call it double counting, and a significant number of people have a problem understanding the logic of that. And then a couple of years ago, the government had a regulation passed called the environmental exemption, so that it was possible for an individual to have steep lands, marshlands, forestry lands, everything. 40% max of their total 1,000 could be exempted out, provided that you weren't having more than 80% forestry. And for a corporation, it was the same application up to 4,200. And certainly the question you ask is one of the main matters that I'm supposed to report on, and it's consumed a significant amount of discussion in these meetings. So
I'm interested in forestry. However, I'm concerned about, as an example, just in around Palmyra Island, where I'm located, Mr. Casely has some 1,500 acres on the block now for sale, and my children and I are interested in forestry, but I would like to have a much more interest in agricultural properties, and I'd like to get the views of people here.
Well,
Because I think that in the future, if you look at the amount of agriculture that was on the island 100 years ago and you compare it to now, it's just a pittance of what it was.
If I could just add something to that, it's not about the agriculture back then, it was the products. And if you had those products today, their value in the marketplace where people wanted them would be just unbelievable. Apples, fruits, berries.
That's exactly what I see.
No, I'm supporting you here. I'm not.
And
And we turn this into a French fry province.
Now, the gentleman who just spoke, his name is Carver, but we're not related. He's Kevin Carver.
I have native blood in me, and I think different than the average person.
I don't have any
More
other-
to say? I have a feeling before the evening's over, you're going to have lots of comments on some of the issues that you raised. I just believe that. And thank you for being the first one. Okay. You interjected. Do you want to say more, Kevin?
I'll say more later, but
Yes.
right now we'll just go on here.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Comment? Yes. We met, but not everyone may know you. I can tell you where you work, but
I'm Margot Stewart, and I'm actually here tonight representing the Wood Islands and Area Development Corporation.
okay.
And we are a community organization that's dedicated to encouraging the growth of socially, environmentally, and economically healthy community. As a community organization, we feel that it is in our best interest that the PEI Lands Protection Act remain the same and be enforced. We believe that increases in the land holding limits would not be economically or environmentally positive for us. If landholding limits were changed, it could lead to corporations or organizations owning large tracts of land in the community. There are currently many small tracts of land in our community owned by many different entrepreneurs, corporations, and organizations. If there were only 2 or 3 corporations, organizations owning the valuable land, it could lead to our current businesses being forced out and taking a few jobs with them. And like the rest of rural Canada, we are currently facing challenging times as much of our youth leave to live in urban areas. Our population in Lot 62 on PEI has declined 13% since 2006. However, having corporations buy all the available land in our area will not help our population or our economy. We need to encourage and help our current small businesses exist and hopefully grow and create jobs. One way we can help to do this is by making sure large organizations and corporations cannot come in and buy all valuable land. It is also important to ensure our land remains valuable. There are many ways to maintain the value of land, one of which is responsible land ownership. New residents in our community look at our land with a fresh set of eyes and bring ideas never thought of. Where our Native community members have a knowledge of our land that one can only learn from spending a lifetime working on it. We need to carefully balance this ratio of non-resident and Native property owners to make sure we keep moving forward, as we need fresh ideas and also need to know where we have been to know where we are going. So this is why I believe that it is important to limit the amount of land that an individual resident or corporation can own.
Thank you. And the Wood Islands Development Corporation, how long has it been in existence? Or?
Since 1998.
1998.
98.
98? Okay. And what are some of the activities that you're involved in?
The major thing is the 70-mile coastal yard sale and the Wood Islands Lighthouse Museum Interpretive Center.
Okay. And okay. And do you meet regularly, or?
Yeah, we meet once a month.
Do you? Good. And how large an organization would it be? Or?
There's 6 board members, 12 board members.
A lot of work, though, to have been involved in that yard sale.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
It's wonderful. Okay, we may come back later on, but thank you very much, and maybe if we could keep that, that would be fine. Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. Somebody else? It may take a little bit of work to make this evening get underway, but I just feel that there are comments out there. Okay. Back here?
Maybe I'll stand up, and I'm not going to go up front. I'm a teacher. I can project usually pretty well. My name is Trudy White. I'm just going to echo what Margot just said. I'm the grade 1-2 teacher at Belfast Consolidated Schools, so the area that's represented by the Development Corporation feeds into our school. And when I started there 15 years ago, we had 36 children in our grade 1 class, and this year there are 8. Last year there are 5. So the number of children in the rural community has really declined. You mentioned young people moving away because of lack of jobs or more job opportunities, but I really would like to see us, and you guys are doing this, trying to encourage people to come in. And yet when I drive to school, it's so disheartening because I just see these big fields getting bigger and bigger. So what were once small farms are now the hedgerows are being cut down and the fields are being amalgamated, and they're just getting bigger and bigger, and the land is being bought and being farmed corporately, and they're not bringing people into the community. They're not creating jobs. That's probably not helping the environment, because when it rains you see red water and you see red snow. And so
If I could just add to that, when you see Montague River running red, something's wrong. The eagles can't feed.
yeah, so I drive to school past that, and I get to school, and there are not very many children there. And think, what's happening to our rural community, how can we turn this around? And I have a granddaughter, new granddaughter, 6 months old, and they're trying to farm organically on a little piece of land, and I ate carrots all winter, and there are ways to have farms, and very healthy farms. But I think raising the land limit will discourage that or make it harder for people with small amounts of money to go in and buy that land and start those farms. Also, I was thinking before I came here, and I didn't know whether I was going to say anything or not, but going back to some of the history you were talking about and Angus MacLean's government and the Lands Protection Act. Well, about 25 years ago, I was invited to sit on the Small Farms Advisory Board, which was kind of part of that. And at that time, and then it became the Sustainable Agriculture Advisory Board for a few years. And at that time, we were looking at things to make agriculture more sustainable environmentally and economically, and diversifying crops and adding value, but also protecting the soil. Lands protection was in there, but then they were talking about planting hedgerows and increasing buffer zones, and somehow we seem to have gotten away from that. At that time, even, we were looking at nitrates leaching down from fertilizers into the soil and how to get more organic matter in there. And I just don't know, how we came so far away from that. And certainly some people are doing it. Kevin, you're trying to do it, but I worry about the large...
Not trying, no.
You are doing,
We
yes, you are doing.
It can be
yeah.
done.
It can be done, certainly it can be done. But I see so much large chemical monoculture, and even now 2-year rotations of GMO crops, and the spray doesn't know that it's not supposed to go beyond the edge of the field. So when I'm driving to school and I see the herbicide, the Roundup in the spring is in the ditch because it's spread out there, so it's washing down. And the seed treatment that's on those seeds every year now in the West,
The problems that
in
the
California
Canadians
with the
having down this area,
nicotinoid.
wireworm.
Yeah, well, now they're finding in places where they've been using those seed treatments year after year after year, they're finding that they are in the groundwater now, and they are leaching into the watersheds. So kind of need to have a look at what we're doing. I'm all for more agriculture, but I'd like to see us, being more careful with our environment too. So I'd like to see the Lands Protection Act strengthened. And the land limits stay at least the way they are, but strengthened in terms of maybe more people in agriculture who can go out and check the buffer zones, because they can't do it unless somebody phones up and reports it. And we can't go walking farmers' fields to find those infractions, so anyway.
I'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bertha Campbell. Sure. Bertha's the past chair of the PI Federation of Agriculture.
Thank you, Horace. I'm glad you gave that introduction. I just want to give a little context for how this whole Land Protection Act review came about, and then I'm going to let Alvin Keenan, who is now the president of the Federation of Agriculture, talk, because he knows a lot more about it than I do in terms of potato production. But basically, at our 2012 annual general meeting, we had a resolution come to the floor that from a farmer that got moved and seconded and basically passed unanimously that we needed to raise the land limit from 1,000 acres for individual to 1,500, and consequently that would raise from 3,000 to 4,500. So that, I just want to tell you how that happened, because I think that is kind of the purest form of democracy, when something comes to a meeting unsolicited, unknown to the executive and board, and goes through.
Did you hold a plebiscite with farmers, Federation of Farmers?
Well, we talked to a lot of farmers. We didn't hold a plebiscite, no. But normally what I've found in boards like Federation of Agriculture, whether it be here on PEI or at the Canadian Federation of Agriculture level, because we're sort of an umbrella organization that takes in, dairy, beef, hogs, potatoes, blueberries.
Supply management, you are also in potatoes.
We
so
are.
You see it from both sides.
We're an umbrella group over all of those commodity organizations, and so there's a lot of give and take, and a lot of times farmers will take the attitude, if it's not going to hurt me and it's going to help my neighboring farmer, let's say
Chances
certain...
are, if I get old and I want to sell out, then if the guy next to me is prosperous, then he'll buy me out. That's the mindset.
Well, possibly, I'm not sure, but
I guarantee it.
certainly certain commodities like blueberries and potatoes and so on are more needing land. Anyway, it wasn't something that we quickly knew how to deal with, and certainly it was kind of a difficult issue in the sense that how do you address this? You know, what will come out of it once we open it up? And we talked for a long time about what do we do. And one of the first things we did after we decided, well, not addressing it doesn't do any good. It's a difficult issue, but we have to look at it. Our members have asked us to. And so we wrote a letter to the Minister of Agriculture and tried to include a lot of statistics on how agriculture has changed. And out of that whole process, I guess, is where government, you know, appointed a land commissioner to look at it. And I guess I'm telling you that process because I want you to know it wasn't something we went out looking for an argument or looking for a difficult issue that would divide communities. But we have heard from so many farmers that are getting to their land limits or getting...
We're a pretty small group here now. We want to have an open conversation here. How many potato growers were dropped 2 years ago? The smallest guys by Cavendish Farms.
And that's not something I know, but, you know, maybe...
do.
Yeah, well, you know, that could well be, and certainly there likely is. You see it in a lot of organizations where, you know, they want to deal. I don't know those figures.
Going this year.
Yeah, I don't know those figures. I'm just going to speak generally. But basically, I think, you know, what we were trying to do was we gave statistics of, you talked about how many dairy farms there used to be. Like back in 1982, I think there were roughly 1,000 dairy farms on the island. 1,150. Okay, there you are. Yeah, and you know, now we're down to less than 200. And we're producing roughly the same milk. Like the size has increased, and it's not something we can get away from.
We want 25,000 cows like they got in Arizona and California.
No,
You want to milk cows like that?
I think what we'll do is, Bertha, you just carry on.
Okay.
And then when you finish, you may have some questions.
Yeah.
And then other people may wish to make their own little presentation.
yeah. I think what we're trying to do is get to better rotations. And certainly, you know, we need to, as we grow more crops like soybeans and so on, we need to get to a 4-year rotation. And so we do need the increased limits for that reason. There's no question that there are issues with soil management that have got to be addressed, and I think they are being addressed. And we do have to continue to address them. I'm not denying that in any way. But I think we do need to get to better rotations, and we do need to acknowledge all of the consolidation that's happened, whether it be in schools, in hospitals, wherever. It's affected us in agriculture too. In my own case, we started in 1979, put in our first crop. We were growing about 40 acres of seed potatoes and milking about 18 cows. And over the years, you know, we are at a point where my husband and I, we farm a couple of thousand acres. We milk about 70 cows a day, and we have a small beef feedlot, and we grow about 550 acres of potatoes. And we are corporate, you know. We are the corporate farm. That's the unfortunate part, that corporate, you know, when you look at farms on PEI, many of them are incorporated for taxation reasons or for succession reasons or liability reasons. It's unfortunate that we're labeled as corporate agriculture. We're small in terms of, in comparing ourselves with other places in the world, but it is the way farming has changed. And you know, Horace always points out how if we didn't have the Lands Protection Act, you know, it would have been, it has held things at bay. We saw Evan show all of the outside ownership and so on. It certainly has held things at bay, and I believe at the time it was wanted by the majority of farmers because there were corporate interests, whether it was Dundas Farms or the Irvings or whatever. But we're now at a point where we have grown. Like, farms are no longer the size they were. In 82, I think a potato farm was about 80 acres. And now the average is about 350 acres. So to get to a 3-year crop rotation, you need 1,000 acres. So I think the consolidation that has happened is really what's driving it. And it's kind of a cruel irony that the Lands Protection Act that was there to protect farmers in the beginning is now sort of strangling farmers. I think you'll find that people have to, if they need a larger land base for rotation reasons or for whatever, it's difficult for them. So I think I'll end at that.
Well, before you end at that, I just want to, well, maybe it's a two-part performance here.
I know, I just said that Alvin would know a whole lot more about this than me because he may have been, I hope he's been collecting his thoughts. I don't want to put him on the spot.
Well, I suspect there's no problem in the collection of thoughts.
Yeah.
Are we going to hear the other part from you, or are you going to, how do you want to handle this, Alvin?
Well, I really express myself. Alvin Keenan is my name. I live in Surrey. I'm a potato grower, but I'm very comfortable whether I speak now or later. I have some thoughts that I'd like to share. I really don't have, a fire and brimstone story on how things should be, but I'm in Murray Harbour, and I would like the people here to speak, but I will speak later or speak now.
Okay, we'll hear from you later.
I think I'd like to do that, let everybody share their comments, and I don't want to sum them up. I won't do that. I'll just share my thoughts with you at the end and let things go on. So, thank you.
Okay. If that's the case, then Bertha, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, if that's okay.
I think that perhaps one point that occurred to me as Alvin was speaking is,
Sure.
as I've gone to a lot of the meetings, I think I've sensed that people feel that if we raise the limits, there'll be more potatoes growing.
Yeah, I'd say that that's a feeling that you could legitimately conclude.
I think it is. I don't see it that way because people can't go out and plant potatoes with no market, with no buyer. You'd lose your shirt. We heard that very eloquently from the gardeners at the Bedeck meeting that, you just can't plant potatoes without knowing your market. And there's groups like, again, Alvin can speak more to United in Canada and United in North America, which is a body that actually tries to match supply and demand. And those groups will tell you where we're going to be in acreage. And we've gone, if you look at the curve, we've gone from 120 or 30,000 acres down to about 80, and we probably need to go down further. When you look...
112 was probably the top, wasn't it, Alva? 130,
Was it?
120,
Okay.
130 is a little high.
Okay, 112 down to about 80. Okay, sorry. But with when you look at consumption and when you look at healthy eating and the French fry market being flat, I think you could make a case that there probably won't be a lot of potatoes grown. Farmers are looking for other crops. I say that, I guess, to try and not reassure, but because I don't know that for sure, but I think there is a myth because people feel they've seen a lot of poor practices and potato has kind of maybe gotten the brunt of that and been maybe the cause of that in some cases. But I don't think the two are, I don't think you can say that if we put the land limits up, there will be more potatoes growing.
As you know, Bertha, because you've attended a lot of the meetings, and several of you in the audience have attended more than one, that my questions shouldn't be interpreted as an indication of what I'm thinking, but rather an attempt to get opinions. And these microphones are for amplification, but they're also recording so that it is possible to eventually go online and hear what has happened in these various meetings. There are so far several things that I have said on a couple of occasions that indicate I have decided to go a certain way, and I'll tell you about those in a moment. But in regards to what you just described, Bertha, is it a pipe dream to ever think that we could, in this little province, show some type of leadership in the whole area of controlling the amount of total potatoes grown? You know, it's my own observation up to before starting this, and I'm hearing a lot of it in the meetings, and even more after the meetings. And incidentally, I wasn't here early tonight, but I had personal commitments in Charlottetown, and the driving wasn't terrific halfway out. But I'm prepared to stay until the cows come home, and if necessary, I'll go down to my cousin's and spend the night. Anything you want to say to me. But when you look at eggs or poultry and dairy and things like this, and now we've got this concern what's going on in Europe and so forth, but we're down now acreage-wise. And in Surrey the other night, one of the gentlemen indicated that we're going to be going even lower in North America, have to get down. So what are the chances? What are the chances that the Federation of Agriculture, which I suspect is the organization that represents most potato producers, could come up with some type of a suggestion or an arrangement, even if it was a temporary trial period, to see if we could have some degree of control on the amount of potatoes we grow?
You know, I think it is going to be down, but I think it's largely dictated by market, you know.
Well, that's not the way it operates with the eggs.
No,
and the
they're supply
poultry and the
managed.
dairy,
Yeah.
and so forth. And
I think it has been tried in potatoes, has it not, Alvin? Like a single.
PEI?
No, in Canada.
North America.
Maybe, I might share a few thoughts maybe, and it'll help just.
Yeah.
okay,
I'm just gonna put a cup up here at the table for anybody that wants to look at. This was a cup full of snow from the John Deere dealership parking lot Saturday after Valentine's Day in Summerside. That was a cup full of snow. About 150 feet from the headland of today's.
Right,
Anybody wants to look at it, feel free.
well, Alvin's moving to the seat, I just thought I'd go over and have a look.
It's a cup full of snow.
well, good evening, everybody, and,
Alvin is from East Surrey and Rolla Bay Holdings, and he's the new president of the Federation of Agriculture.
so just a few thoughts, I guess. Sometimes economic success is a challenge in business today. I often say legal money is extremely hard to make. And, maybe we go back a little bit in history. You showed Evan, I guess, as you showed the geography of PEI a little bit on the boundaries tonight. It took me back a little bit in time. I'm from away, and I want to touch on that a little bit. The first time I set foot on Prince Edward Island, I turned 13 years old that day, on 22nd of May, 1967. So you can figure some more things out from that. Anyway, my father grew potatoes in Woodstock and Brunswick. I'm going to touch a little bit on things and what I've seen and how I've changed my mind and how I value the simple things in life. And every time somebody mentions the way how we'd like to have things the way they used to be, I want you to know I understand and I agree. But anyway, prior to that, where we come from means something sometimes, and a culture we grew up in. I do think that most of us here, our ancestors have all, came to this country, so we have to share that, and we have some things in common. Now, I'm going to go back I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to the year I got married, 1975, and I moved to live where I live today, and I call it the wide spot in the road out in the middle of New Zealand, and the water runs both ways there, north and south, so I'm on top of the world. And the neighbor we lived beside became the second mother to my wife. As Nancy came from Grand Falls area, New Brunswick, and moved out to New Zealand, it was, some people might say like that was the armpit of the nation. But our next door neighbor, she came from away. She alluded that to Nancy and was so good to her. She said, Nancy, when I came here, I came from the next parallel. I came from Surrey Line Road. That's the next parallel from New Zealand. So it's kind of interesting, the connection from away. Now, when I was 5 years old, I remember standing up in the truck, steering it while they loaded hay. At that time, a hay loader behind the truck, and some of the older people will know what I mean here. It conveyed the product up on the back of the flatbed, and men forked it ahead. And they kept saying to me, straddle the hay. And I wanted to steer the truck so bad, but I didn't know what the word straddle meant. So now communication became very important to me at the age of 5, because if I didn't do it right and please them, I couldn't play the game. And since that time, in agriculture, as we market our goods and try to please the customer, regardless of how far that customer is removed from the farm gate, it could be the merchant that we sell the potatoes to in our own little village or our town. And when Horace mentioned his connection to the whites, I just wondered, was some of your ancestors, there was a Captain White that sailed vessel out of this area some number of years ago, but
Not closely related.
but it struck a note, but that's how this area served a lot of the marketplace at that time. But anyway, I'm coming back to playing the game again. And we come down, I had to drive the truck properly, and I said to the man, what does straddle mean? Well, he said, don't drive on the hay. So then I understood. So once I did it properly, I was allowed to steer the truck. That was great fun for a young lad. Anyway, as we go along through life, we've handled chemicals, and I was so happy in my life. 35 years ago, I was in Seattle, Washington, and I first heard the terminology genetically modified potatoes. And these potatoes, and the lady said to me, in 10 years, you'll see them on your farm. They'll be available, and the potato bugs won't eat them. And I was thinking, great. Then I won't have to spray insecticides, which are so dangerous to people and to our environment, and we don't know the impact on a lot of things. So anyway, lo and behold, when we got the potatoes, we grew a few of them. They worked fine. Then the outcry came, no GMOs. Now, I have a business partner that happens to be my brother, and we've been extremely complimentary to each other through our years. He's the only person that I've never had an argument with in public. And as we go down through our channels, it was the only document that I had ever signed at that time for our business that I didn't show him, because I knew that I was signing my legal rights away if Monsanto ever wanted to sue me. Later on in life, we grew the potatoes for a few years, and I'm going to get on with life here pretty quick. I'm coming up into this. I'm up into the 90s here now, but we grew the potatoes for a few years, and there was public outcry that we couldn't ship genetically modified French fries to Europe. So at that time, one of the major processors and a good friend of mine himself was Harrison McCain. They didn't want any more genetically modified potatoes in their processing plants, so they wouldn't have cross-contamination of French fries, which they did ship to Europe. They did ship French fries to Europe, So GMOs went on the back burner. Later on in life, I signed a contract with a protected variety which wasn't genetically modified, but a private variety. And then I understood why he didn't want GMOs. At that time, we paid the seed grower. If he wanted $10 a hundred for his seed, he had to pay $3 of that to the royalty to the breeder. So in Russet Burbank variety, that amounted to 3 times 15, approximately $45 an acre. You can take Prince Edward Island, use easy math if you wish for a moment, at 100,000 acres, which we didn't grow that many protected varieties, but that was possible. That was 100,000 times 45, what's that, 4.5 million? Like, it adds up fast. So then I understood why they didn't want GMOs, because the protected variety, not GMO, that I signed to have was one owned by a large processor. They wanted the money. They didn't want Monsanto getting their money that coming from their growers. I assume that was a big factor, although Europe is strong against GMOs. If we didn't have GMO crops today in our lives, we'd be naked. We wouldn't have cotton. It should be a pretty cool spot around here. Anyway, now we're going to come on down through a little bit more in life. As producers, we have to please people constantly. And we do that. And I watch it in the question here tonight, how many contract growers have lost their contracts to certain processors? None of us like to hear that somebody no longer has a contract for whatever reason. And I want you to know that farm organizations struggle with how to isolate themselves from that. We talk about legislation, we talk about different things, and there's some things that are possible, but we have to have good communication, like I had to learn at the age of 5 so I could steer the truck, and that's one of our challenges today. Now we're coming into larger acreage. My father bought land in Prince Edward Island. One of the reasons he did was they built the power dam on the St. John River above Fredericton, New Brunswick. So that flooded some of his potato land in Woodstock. He's deceased now. He died in the year 2000. But up until that time, my father never had any problems that a few more potatoes wouldn't have cured. That's how he felt. Anyway, as he came to Prince Edward Island to grow potatoes, his objective was to grow seed potatoes and sell them and load ships in Surrey and sell them, to Florida and what have you. And he did do that. But that market changed. Come back into packaging fresh potatoes, and we still are today. Red soil, that hurts. Red soil hurts. I guess the only good thing, it may move from one farm to the other. Hopefully it doesn't go away. Like, I know it's moving around and I don't like it, and there isn't anybody else that does. And we try cover crops. I've seen us harvest potatoes, spread winter wheat on our soil ahead of the harvester, on the fields ahead of the harvester. The harvester would till that naturally as you go through it. That would come up. By gosh, we have bigger problems with wireworm when we do that. Every time we have an action, we have a reaction. Chemicals, farm chemicals. There's new crop protectants. I guess that glass is pretty near half full. I'll call it crop protectants. And if you're opposed to all that, we call them pesticides. Any product that controls a pest, if you could put milk on your potato plants or any plant to control an insect, that is deemed as a pesticide because it controls pest. So remember, anything that controls a pest is classified as a pesticide regardless of its danger. We talked about how many more, as Bertha got up and spoke, and I should say about Bertha, Bertha is a hard act to follow. And as she sat here tonight, I was thinking, wow, here is an example of the most, what's the right word when they have different crops on your farm? Diverse? farm operations that you could have. I don't know how she finds the time to attend all the meetings. Even today, when I emailed her to say I'd be going here, I didn't want to ask her not to come because she's so informative when she does. But, you know, she knew I was coming, yet she came here for her own self-interest and to share comments with growers and people, I should say, and answer questions. To operate, to live on a dairy farm, beef cattle and potatoes, and they make it all work. A few years ago, there was a Russian delegation that met my father. I was only a child, and they had these little wooden, like those stacking cups there, and every time they took one apart, under that was behind some great person was another great person. Bertha is a good example of behind every man is a better woman. You know, I shouldn't say a better woman, but an excellent woman. I want to be careful because Vernon is a top-notch person. But anyway, it's a great team, and we're fortunate to have people like that here on Prince Edward Island. And everything they stand for is good in their eyes. And everything everybody else stands for here tonight is good in your eyes. And somehow the Federation of Agriculture, what our objective is to make this good for everybody. And I think for us to do that, we have to really listen and try to understand other people's issues and be cautious not to be critical of them, because everybody understands their own situation their best, and I don't think there's anybody here tonight that'll want to change places with anybody else. I know my own problems the best, and I don't wish anybody else to have them. Now, how many acres we will grow? Prince Edward Island, under the mathematical equation, we should produce 7,000 acres less next year to meet the supply, to meet the demand that we think North America will require. Big companies, and one of the largest frozen food processing companies in the world today, they projected a growth last year of 8%. They ended up with 2%. Every province in Canada has projected a budget, and they've all been behind. They've all spent more money than their budgets, with the exception of Saskatchewan, according to the Premier tonight. And so healthcare, we're wrestling with that. How many beds do we need to care for the people, i.e. in the hospitals, or what's the right word for manners? I'm going to use the word care here for a moment. Long-term care. And you know, with what population we have today and the age of us, in 20 years, we're going to have a surplus of beds. Makes you think.
In long-term care,
60 years.
but maybe not in nursing home care.
Anyway, 60 years ago, there was 20 types of produce. Why are we going to need less potatoes? I'm not sure why. But 60 years ago, there was 20 types of produce on a store shelf in California, and one of them was potatoes. And today, there's 850 types of produce available through a national chain store. Not all in the same store, because you have different ethnic populations or groups of people that live in different areas. But now, let me qualify that a little more of how skewed my numbers are, because you can fire holes all through them. You can count on your fingers 30 different potato SKUs in a chain store, in a Sobeys store in the province of Quebec, before you get into organic. See? So these numbers are skewed some, because probably 45 SKUs today of what was 2 or 3 SKUs 60 years ago are potatoes, see? But people have more choices for for produce, and that's some of the reasons why we will require less potatoes. There's 100 families of crops in the world. Potatoes are one of them. They're the nightshade plant. And please don't ask me to name any more, because I can't here. Tomatoes are similar. Tomatoes are nightshade. And they're susceptible to similar pests and diseases in plant health. So out of the other 99 families of crops, there must be some more of them that we can produce here in Prince Edward Island and generate revenue with them. Now, my brother and I have managed to build a farm operation, and now we look at succession. And it's one of the biggest struggles you have. When I was 5, I made up my mind then that I wanted to farm. For some reason, I was able to. I'm not sure that was a wise decision, but anyway, I'm here, and it's what I would like to do as long as I have my health. To sell your farm today or to give it to the next generation or what have you, I don't see the numbers of players being available. You know, I asked the lady in the office, because I should know these answers, not have to ask, but I don't do all the work on our farm. And I get annoyed at myself sometimes at how little I do. But there isn't much I haven't done, and I can sure tell you if the person that is doing it isn't doing it right. But I asked her, I said, Janice, how many T4s did we have last year? And most people would know that in their own business. Unfortunately, I didn't. And she said 68. So the 68 people that came and went, or came and worked a while. So some may have only worked 2 or 3 hours, but I have people that's been there 40 years. So in that, we are in farms as we've gotten larger. I do think that we've probably employed as many people as there is farms that we have so-called own, and really all we have the right to do is pay taxes on them. And but anyway, I've touched on a little bit. The Federation of Agriculture, our concern is to present. We will present a brief. The Federation will in Charlottetown meeting. But our big concern is what recommendations do we make so agriculture can be stronger in Prince Edward Island and our producers be stronger? And it's a big challenge. And you know, blueberries are important to the Federation of Agriculture. And by gosh, bees are important, because we have to have those for some of our crops. And not just horticultural crops. Bees are a big factor for canola. And so what the horticultural industry asks for, you know, your grains and oilseeds industry are as important. So I've touched on a bunch of topics here. I only want to ask everybody, and one of the things that I'm very strong on myself, and as Rollaby Holdings, we gave a brief in Surrey, and I don't know how many more people did, but I asked my brother, I said, please give what you'd like to have so you can qualify. As I watched the show on TV here yesterday, and a little bit colorful, it was a Sunday or a day, I lost track of my days here. I guess if I had gone to church Sunday, I'd know what day it is today. He said the moonshiners, and they stayed hidden. Everything they did it under the table, no records. The person that made the product didn't see the person that hauled it. The person that hauled it didn't see the person that took it to the retailer. And the person that paid it didn't know who the retailer was. And everything was in the dark. And I think for agriculture to survive in the future, we have to be a little more open. And in our operation, for example, we lease land in. We lease land out. Some farmers don't have to. Their farm operations are different. So in our operation, if you follow all the rules and you're transparent to everything, your numbers are higher. Doesn't mean you control the land. It means we have to farm it and meet the environmental regulations. I don't complain about that. I think that that's a must. We have to meet, follow every rule. So when you do that, all of a sudden, my needs are different, not greater. My needs are different than somebody else's, and I only hope that when I look at legal counsel, that Mr. Carver is somehow able to, if I'm going to ask Murray Harbour here tonight, please don't agree with me. Tell the commission exactly what you want and why, so he can put resolve to it and see if we can make this fit. I think it's our best chance, and let's work hard on making agriculture strong on Prince Edward Island. So, if you wish to grow a garden patch the size of this floor in this hall we're in, you should be able to do that. And if somebody needs to think they own or control 1, 2, or 3,000 acres of land, providing it's producing revenue, and some revenue is staying in Prince Edward Island so we can have our health care, so we can have our highways and our schools and our rinks so our children can play hockey and those type of things, to have events. I think that's our challenge today. And I hope this doesn't sound like a sermon, but to me, that's what the Federation of Agriculture stands for. And anybody ask me questions, or I'll go sit down. So, thank you.
Anyone have a question of Alvin? Kevin Carver.
Just on the overall land ownership thing, when you say about your T4s, our family owns about 2,000 acres, and I am for tightening this thing up. I don't need 2,000 acres, but that's the model I was thrown into. I like being successful, and I probably should have had more. But you know what? Now, as I get older, I start seeing things a little different or whatever, and I look at that 2,000 acres is 20 or 30 families. You say you had 60 people working for you. A lot of prosperous farmers years ago had, hired hands or whatever. So there's not a lot of trade-off there, really. But that's not my point. Now I'm moving into the next thing. Do you know a man named Darrell Lingley?
Darrell who?
Lingley.
Personally, no, I can't place him in my...
Food.
Excuse me?
The Soil Food Web Lab.
Okay.
You know...
No, I don't, but in a way, that's okay. I'd like you to speak what you want to say now.
Well, it's...
I don't know the Pope, but I got an idea who he is.
He's at your farm. He's done some tests on your farm.
Okay.
You don't know?
No, but I'm sure somebody there does, but that's fine. Yep.
And when I went to AC back in the early 80s, whatever, crops all pushed the chemical analysis in the soil. I never once heard about the biology in the soil. And that is the new frontier of agriculture, is biology. Mm-hmm. Or do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I sure do.
And when fungi in the soil have the ability to bring nutrients to plants or whatever, and we're dumping on fungicides, big problem. And if we could measure the nutrients in the food that we're producing under the system that we are working now, then it might sway things one way or the other. And I am not an organic producer, but I do, you say 5-year-old is when you said you were going to be a farmer, or that?
That's when I set my sights, yeah.
I have no recollection of never wanting to be a farmer from the day that I can remember. It was about farming. And both my grandfathers farmed, and one of them said on my mother's side that when land started to be rented was the downfall of this province, because pride ownership was lost. And he lived through seeing the tobacco industry come into our neighborhood, destroy thousands of acres of land that would have been the very best of blueberry ground in the world, because tobacco had to be grown on high land that was frost-free. Government policy just absolutely destroyed that. And you know why that was done? I'm making a statement here now. You might agree or disagree. But There was a guy came from BC, and he set up a little plant in Montague. You know?
No, but what I'd like to do is, I don't mind, I'll answer questions with you one-on-one.
Okay,
No,
I
no,
wanna
but,
finish- I
no,
wanna finish
but,
this.
no, but there's a lot of people here, and I'm very serious. There's a lot of people here, and I would like them to give them a chance to speak to the commission tonight, and you and I can, we'll wrestle these things over.
I'll finish my statement here.
yep.
My mother worked in the office at Fraser Valley Foods in Montague.
Yeah, I know.
She'd come into the office and there'd be trailer loads of French fries that was sold. And the McCain family would come in overnight on telex and undercut that man from BC, to the point in time he threw up his hands and said, I gotta leave, I can't put any more money into that. And my mother seen your brother in that door. He was there a lot. And there's other people in Surrey that know the deal as well as I do. And there was a trade-off here. That plant goes, and tobacco industry come in.
Well, that had nothing to do with my brother, know that, so.
No, I know.
No.
But you know the story as well as I do.
Yep.
About land ownership and control in this area, this Southern Kings area. And we have just moved up to another outfit from New Brunswick that is looking to own and control land in this province. And you say about secession and ownership and moving to the next generation. Well, as these farms get bigger, no young couple can come in and buy land and start farming. It's the big guy next door until eventually big fish eat little fish until there's only one shark left.
Would you, one thing I'll say before I sit down, I know this is hard to believe and understand. You don't need a pocket full of money to start farming. You need to generate a lot of money farming. And I know that personally because when my brother and I started farming, we didn't have enough money to buy a sick monkey's breakfast.
You're not that much older than me.
No, that's all I'm going to say to you. I'm not going in my, it has nothing to do with my age. And if you wish,
Now, Alvin,
no,
than it was
anyway,
then for a
but
young
anyway,
couple to start farming.
but anyway, all I'm going to say is what I've experienced, and I think that I hope agriculture can be strong so people can want to get in it, and as people work with us on the farm, as we work on succession, one of the most important things that I look at, the first factor, is does this person want to do that? And they have to have that first. That's the first part of the foundation. Not a lot of people have the tremendous ability, but don't want to. And so, anyway, I'm going to sit down now.
I will object to
Anyway.
your statement that you
That's
don't have to
okay.
have a pocket full of money to start.
Anyway, that's mine. Thank you. Okay. I hope I've opened the door a little bit for comments. Please don't attack me, but address yourselves. This is very important that the commission hear your thoughts. They've heard mine. Thank you.
Well, let's have a look at this yellow sheet of paper that I passed out. Now's the time for a little quiz. And, no, not really. But I want you to look at the center part there, those 4 items. And one of the, everyone's talked about, a lot of people are talking about ownership trends, rural communities. We have had no discussion tonight on talking about red tape and IRAC and those types of matters. And then we have to do with utilities. IRAC made a decision a few years ago that now you count easements. So that, like for example, Maritime Electric, it owns various power lines, but now they count easements. So it could be that Maritime Electric is very close to its limit. For example, to give an example of this, if somebody has bought 2 or 3 acres along the shore and it's quite a distance to the road, IRAC looks at not just their non-resident the amount of the title they have on the shore, but they count their share of the easement. Okay? So if you come along American Electric and you say you want to have power down to your lot, and easements are counted, American Electric may be at the situation where they're very close to reaching their corporate limits. And so what do you people think about that? Is that a situation, true?
Well, the easement isn't necessarily the same as ownership, though.
But the way the Lands Protection Act is worded, it's not just dealing with ownership, it's dealing with an interest in land. And an easement is an interest in land. And one of the questions I have to comment on is this matter of utilities and this getting close to limits. Now, when we were at the Charlottetown meeting, I raised this, I believe, at the Montague meeting, and some people thought, well, maybe they should just be exempted. And then one gentleman made the observation, well, that sounds okay, except that we're doing a major transmission line across a whole bunch of land, and then maybe that's worthy of an environmental assessment, and I happen to actually agree with that. Now, what some people don't know is that American Electric takes an easement, usually 66 feet wide, along private lane going down to where the cottage and new home is. And if you were to count all the true American Electric easements, you would find that a number of years ago that people gave to American Electric not just 66 feet in width, but they gave them an easement over their entire farm. Because that's what the lawyers did representing American Electric. And we know that's the case because I come across it from time to time when I represent someone who's buying some land, and I see that American Electric has this easement. Okay, so I need some help, guys. I need some help in what do I think and say about this issue I'm just talking about. And so, what do you folks think? You folks.
So there'd be double counting and triple counting, because then you have the person that owns it, then you have someone that has an easement, then you have the telephone company, then you have the TV, and you'll double.
And guess what? If I was over near Panmure Island where you are, and we had adjacent pieces of land along the shore, then the easement is counted in your land holdings, it's counted in my land, we counted in Bell Line, it's counted American Electric. And that is not just double counting, Mr. Carrier, that is multiple counting.
Exactly.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, I just wanted a little bit of a fireside chat here, my old nostalgia of Murray Harbour. I just want to know what you think about, would be an okay suggestion to say to the provincial cabinet in that particular situation that this is never what was intended when it came to easements and counting of electrical.
I think so.
Okay. What does anybody else think? What do you think, Trudy?
Well, I think that people have the right to have power, if they, so I would think it would have to be exempted.
Yeah. But when I went to visit my grandparents, it's almost like going into a mystical world. I went into a world in which there was no electricity. My grandparents never owned a car. My grandfather, when he went to get the mail, he either walked along the shoreline, just below Hilda Sharon's store, which no longer exists, or he would row the dory, and I'd go with him. Okay. So, somebody else, what do you think?
You could also throw your windmills in there too.
Okay. And what do you think about that now? What, windmills, does that have anything on this as well?
Right. Windmills don't work. Germany went into wind power. I lived in Germany with the military, and they're back to nuclear power because everybody got sick. And I told Mr. Binns, before you start building, putting windmills on the island, go over to Germany and see what happened there. People are getting sick, and the same thing with Sri Lanka getting sick.
Okay. Now, What do the people back here, what do you think, Marco, of the utilities and American Electric? Do you have any comment on that, what I've been talking about here? Okay. The gentleman beside?
It seems like when you create a crown, not a crown corporation, but a company that controls absolutely everything in terms of electricity, well, there's no competition, so I don't see how those acres of easement would matter one way or another.
Now,
What is the definition of an easement? Who owns it? Who pays taxes on it? What happens? Well, I don't understand it.
well, if, Kevin, if you have a cottage lot that you sold to somebody, and you gave them a right-of-way or an easement from that cottage lot to the public road,
So you can't landlock it.
you can't landlock it, you own the right-of-way, and if I have the cottage lot down there, I have an easement or a right-of-way over it, but as Mr. Carrier says, it's counted in his land holdings, my land holdings, and counted in yours.
So why couldn't we just say that an easement like that with a power line on it be made into bee pasture or something, that it goes into a provincial land holding that gets taken away from me as a farmer or a landowner and is for the good of society, for bee pasture,
Like roadways?
basically?
Well, we'll come back to that thought a little later. Now, one other thing that I'm supposed to be directed towards is application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners. And that's really a tough one. Of the terms of reference here, it's the one that I least understand. Okay? What does that mean? And I have read that at every single meeting, and I have gotten not a single question. So, since I don't understand it, I just thought that I would send a question off to the people who gave me this authority. Okay? And in the, around 1982, when the Act came into existence, there was a regulation put in place. I actually had a lot to do with the regulation. And it basically said this, that if a person wished to give a piece of land, or an interest in a piece of land, to their sibling, to their spouse, to their parent, to their grandparent, to their child or grandchild, that could all happen even if the person that was receiving the land was a non-resident principality. That could all happen because of the family connection. And that was the intent, and that was the spirit of the legislation at the time. And for a long time, that's the way it was. But a few years ago, some people in my profession figured out that maybe this was an avenue to do certain things. Okay? I.e., that if this gentleman down at Guernsey Cove decided to sell 40 acres of land, and he had about 1,500 feet along the water in Guernsey Cove, then you want to sell it, and the person who wants to buy it is a non-resident, but they don't want to go through IRAP. And this gentleman hasn't advertised it that long, and he really likes the price, and he wants to sell it. So what the purchaser does, he says to his legal counsel, what are some legal ways here that this can happen? And so the legal counsel says something like this to Mr. and Mrs. Purchaser, well, give me your family tree, okay? And family trees for some non-residents are a lot more difficult to ascertain than around here. Okay? There aren't many carvers. I'm related to about 2 or 3 carvers in Prince Valley, but I have thousands of other relations. Because down around this area, I'm related to the Becks twice. Jenkinses, okay, Whites. And up where I come from, the Joneses and Jenkinses. My wife's been away and she hears me talking with this. She says, thank God you brought some new blood over here every so often. Okay? But, so, what's the solution to this? So the lawyer says, give me a family tree. So Mr. and Mrs. Jones, they got a couple of siblings, they got a couple of adult kids, and everything else. Well, he says, I need about 8 or 9 close relations. Okay? So they put 8 or 9 close relations on the deed with Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and now up to about 9 or 10. Enough land so that everybody is below 5 acres of land. Every person is below 165 water frontage, and it's all very legal. We don't have to go to executive council. You've never advertised it publicly. It all takes care of. Okay? Now we've suddenly got 9 or 10 property owners. Okay? So step number 1. Step number 2 is Mr. and Mrs. Jones, although they really enjoy sending Christmas cards and having Christmas dinner with all these relatives, they don't want all these people on their deed. So what they do is they say, Mr. Jones says, okay, I want my mom and dad to give me their share and my siblings to give me their share, so it goes to Mr. Jones. Now it can't go to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. It can only go to Mr. Jones, because the regulation says it can only be a child up or down, across like this. It can't go to the in-laws. Okay. So Mrs. Jones, she does the same thing. Okay. And now when you've got that all taken care of, because you have changed so many deeds around, you have created an unequal, undivided interest in all of this 40 acres of land, the Guernsey Cove. Okay? Now Mr. and Mrs. Jones, although they love each other, they're a little dubious about who's going to die first and so forth. And so then, after they get this share in one person's name and this unequal share in another person, then they deed it to each other. Okay? And then they are in heavenly bliss, because it's just where they always want to be. Okay? They've avoided IRAC application fees. They have avoided the time and trouble of going through the process. And they've avoided having their land identified for non-development uses. And the net result is that we have had anywhere from 6 to 8 or 10 different deeds, pay registration fees, about $100 a piece, pay the lawyers some more money, and it's all taken care of. Now, what do you think about that? Because that's what these words are about.
Well, that seems illegal. That's against the spirit of the law.
Well, some people would call it a loophole. Okay? On the other hand, we live in a society which is a free and democratic society. Okay? And what type of reasonable limits? Like I said last night in North Rustico, a lot of people are making suggestions that we should do this and we can't do that and we need to do this and whatever. And you know, I listen to it very carefully, and I've taken notes, and sometimes I just put the pen down, just sort of to get, you know, you take so many notes sometimes. This is my note keeper, eh? This is Patrick Carroll. He's my scribe, okay? He's terrific. Okay? And my wife came to one of the early meetings. I asked her, which seat do you like in the front row? She said, I'm not going to your meetings. Anyway, she's interested, but she's heard me and my stories and everything else. She said, why don't you have Patrick have a laptop? So I said to Patrick, why don't you get a laptop? Well, he says, I can't fully appreciate the flavor with a laptop. He says, I was taught the other way. And he's only 32, right? So he takes all these copious notes. Okay? So I said last night at North Rustico, I am listening awfully carefully to suggestions you all make. And I'm particularly listening to those suggestions in which indicate you have walked or are capable of walking in someone else's shoes. I have tried very, very hard in these sessions to make sure that we hear each other. Okay? It was suggested to me when I started off that I just had 3 or 4 sessions, that I hold an open house here and I come in at 9 o'clock in the morning. I don't mind being in Murray Harbour at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was in Montague at 20 to 9 yesterday morning. I finished my night in North Rustico at 11:15. So I don't mind long days. But to me, that wasn't any good. I want us to hear each other. Okay? So, eventually, just tell you what I said last night in North Rustico, and it's because my friend Angus MacLean, and if you sort of want to know how I think, buy the Angus MacLean memoirs. They're out of print, but you can find them in the bookstores. I was actually one of the proofreaders of the book. And it was the only time in my life that Angus MacLean ever snapped at me. Okay? He and I were very close. I was his campaign chairman at age 26 when he ran for leadership of the Conservative Party in 1976. And I suggested to him when he retired as premier, he'd write his memoirs. And he literally snapped at me. I don't have time to do that. I have trees to look after, sheep to tend, and blueberries to harvest. Okay? I said, okay, Angus, sorry. But I know you as a retired secretary is doing all your typing, so I can't help you at the office with that. But you can use my photocopier anytime you want to after you leave the premier's office. And he would come in every so often and photocopy certain things and so forth. And then I noticed the photocopies were getting more and more and more. So I said to him, what are you photocopying? Well, he said, I'm just getting some records together and everything else. And then in the Easter weekend of 1998, he came in and he says, I have a little favor to ask if you were, I hope it's not too inconvenient, but I was just thinking that would it be possible if you would consider proofreading my memoirs? Well, I'm really floored. I'm really floored. Okay. And so I did the proof. And at the book launch, my wife said to him, and Marion Bruce from High Bank, who we all know, and who's a wonderful citizen, she's helped so many organizations. And she made the Spirit of Education, Prince of Wales, and all these different organizations just come alive. And this is not meant to be critical of Marion, because she's such a wonderful, talented individual. But my wife said to Angus, the part of the book that I enjoyed the most was the first part about the war and how you live. And he said, Lucille, that's the part that I wrote every word of myself. And he was a man that was hard to get to talk about the war. Okay? But when he did, I always learned a great deal. And Gwen asked me to deliver the eulogy when he passed on. But he said that when people are wanting governments to do this and do that, and to legislate this and to legislate that, we are basically asking governments to be all powerful in all things to us. And if we ask government to be that powerful, we better be prepared to give them that power and authority to take everything that they want from us at some point in time. And he also said that those most valuable things in life are those things that are truly priceless. And one of the things that I get concerned about, Patrick and I might do the article there, I'm not sure about yet. What I'm concerned about is a whole bunch of things. And one of the concerns that I'm having is this idea that somehow, I won't say we're against each other, but we just haven't learned well enough how to understand and listen to each other. And I am concerned that those that support the Lands Protection Act think it's the be-all and end-all, and it is our savior, it's going to protect us from everything. Well, I've got news for you guys. It ain't that good. Okay? I am amazed that this piece of legislation has been well respected and well regarded as it has been. My briefing books for this assignment are phenomenal. I laughed at home to myself when I got them and looked at them. I can't believe it. The amount of papers and documents and legal opinions and commissions and reports have all been done about this. Yet there's only been one court case that's really gone to the heart of this Lands Protection Act. And that was a Court of Appeal decision in the mid to 1980s, in which a well-known corporate farmer went to court and said, if I have to count in my lands that I lease in, I should be able to deduct the lands that I lease out. And guess what? The Court of Appeal said that was right. And there's a lot of logic to that. There's a lot of sense to that. And there may be other reasons why someone's opposed to a particular corporate entity or whatever. But you know, we have to be careful that we do it based on logic and reason. And so anyway, the Court of Appeal, 3 judges said, if you have to count to lease in, you should be allowed to count to lease out. However, a few years later, the government came along and they deemed that wasn't going to be the case. And if you look carefully in this, it uses the word deeming in paragraph 3. And it talks about, see that deeming requirements? And that's the power that legislatures and parliaments have. We can pass a law that can deem Mr. Carrier to be a female. That's the power the parliament has. Okay? So, excuse me, that was in the late 80s. In the early 90s, the first Premier Giz asked me to be the lawyer for the government, to be the lead lawyer for Department of Solicitors, because there was a concern that somebody was acquiring land, had acquired land in this province, without getting IRAP approval. Because they weren't technically a farm corporation. The Premier was convinced that that was a legitimate concern. And I remember the day, I got the telephone call. Pick up the phone, Horace, Joe Giz. What are you doing? I'm going to the courthouse to file a document. Come and see me first. Okay, well, 5th floor. I'm concerned that there's somebody out there that has a whole bunch of land and they're not truly a farm corporation. And I want this taken care of. Because remember what I said earlier? If you were a farm corporation, you didn't need IRAP approval. You didn't need a separate council approval. Okay? So anyway, I made some inquiries and did certain things. And, well, the easy way to do it was to file a writ, have a court case, whatever. However, there was a risk, in my opinion. Because every time you go to court, I'm of the opinion when you put the coins in the machine, and the writs and shackles and rocks and rolls, you better prepare for the decision that comes out. And sometimes the decision that comes out isn't what you think it's going to be. I know that well enough. I used to settle all my poor cases, take the good ones to court. I couldn't help the lawyer on the side made the wrong judgment call. That's why I had a better track record of winning than losing, because I settled losers. Okay? I had doubts about this case. I knew that the amount of financial resources against me was tremendous. And I decided, let's see if we can talk this one out. And we talked over a couple of days. And the result was, in 1991-92, a decision was made by the corporate landholder that all of their lands that had been acquired in that process were going to be divested. And I got pretty happy, pretty relieved too. I picked up the telephone, the newspaper came out the next morning, picked the telephone and called Leon Bagno, one of my best friends. And I was very instrumental in getting her to run for elected office. And I said, Leon, she was leader of the opposition. There's only two of them in there. I said, I just want you to know, because you're going to find out, I was directly involved representing the government of Prince Edward Island, and whatever you want to say and whatever you want to ask in the legislative system, you go right ahead and you forget our friendship. Okay? Anyway, I think that, looking back, not because I was involved, But the two parts that I am really proud of when it comes to Land Protection Act is that we stood up to Pierre-Éliott Trudeau in 1980 and said, you don't understand what this province is about. Land is different in Prince Edward Island. And then we put the act through, which was strong support. Yes, I'm prepared to admit that there was perhaps stronger unanimity in the agriculture community than there might be today. And then the early 1990s. Because, God, there was so the government of Prince Edward Island needed and wanted without going to court. Okay? Now, you're going to say, what in blazes is Carver talking about? He's philosophizing again, and on and on and on. Well, what I'm trying to illustrate is, when I listen to some of these points of view that are being expressed at various meetings, and if I was running the roads again, looking for candidates, as I did in the 1970s, Darlene, I would be telling you that I am absolutely staggered by the quality of men and women of all ages and how articulate they are at these public meetings. I've just been thrilled. I have just been excited when I have come away from some of these meetings, almost to the point that one is tempted to give them that whole life again, but I'm not. Okay. You know, we have a terrific sense of men and women and youth in this province who truly do have a good sense of pride of place. Now, one of the things I'm really, really scared of is that somebody is going to figure out how to do certain things in this province and acquire a significant amount of land without many of us knowing what to do and being able to stop. There's words like land grabbing and worldwide. We have, if I was to ask, I was always amazed down around this area as the older I got, because my grandparents used to talk about characters down here in a mystical sense. It was unbelievable. And the stories were absolutely wonderful. Whether they're all true or not didn't make any difference. But I know that there is a significant amount of money in banks in this area of the province. This is an area where people are careful with their coin and so forth. And if we were to indicate who the wealthiest families around this area are, I don't think people could say. If we were trying to do it across the province, I suspect that we would come up with 4 or 5 names and 90% of us in this room would be correct. And those individuals are wealthy, those families across the province. They're very wealthy as far as we're concerned. But you know what? They're almost paupers as far as the world's wealth is concerned. Almost paupers. Okay? Now, I've been collecting newspaper articles. Okay? I'm a bit of a pack rat. And the Globe and Mail comes to our house every day, and one of my joys in life is to read the Guardian and the Globe and Mail. I read them in the order of the Guardian first and the Globe and Mail. But in the February 25th issue of the Globe and Mail business section, this is what it said. International billionaires are forking over tens of millions for New York's latest. And note for high-end living is a hedge against uncertainty, and many are doing it sight unseen. Well, last year in New York, there were a whole bunch of condos that were sold. In November, there was a condo sold for $54 million. In June, $70 million. In February, it was $88 million. And in July and in May, there were 2 sold, each for $90 million. Okay? So let's forget the low stuff. You know, let's just deal with the big stuff. So $90 million, $90 million, that's $180 million. Now, if somebody came to me and said, and I wasn't doing this job, which I'm not going to, after the end of June, I'm going to practice law full-time again. I'm just doing part-time now. But if somebody came to me and I had nothing to do with what I'm doing and said, Horace Carver, there's a cashier's check, bank draft, certified, there is $180 million. And I want you to figure a way for me to buy as much land in Prince Edward Island as possible with as least commotion and least trouble, what can you do? And I would come back to them, and I said, I need 2 hours. I need an hour to find typist. Now, last night when I told the story in North Rustico, I forgot to add a significant point. In order for this to work, I would tell them I would really need about an 18-month to a 2-year thing to make it happen. I could do it in less than that, but I really need that. I know I said that on the previous night elsewhere, so I just make that point that North Rustico, I should have put that in. And I could give you, under the present situation, how we can acquire. Now, how do you do it? How do people not know? Well, this is what you do. First of all, you go and you search titles to property without an agreement of purchase and sale. Okay? And then we get the deed already. And then in a day, we say, hey, would you like to sell your property and pay me around, Mr. Carrier? And I got the check, and you can have it certified. We'll do it in 24 hours. That can happen. And I don't know how much $180 million is going to buy. And if you guys think that you have different points of view, and I'm talking about you generically, all these meetings, if you have strongly held opinions against somebody or this or that or anything else, and whatever, guess what? When we get down to the crunch, and if those crunches come, we're going to have to be all together, because I do think there's a difference. Angus MacLean was criticized big time, particularly in Front Page Challenge, those wonderful intelligentsia, Gordon Sinclair and Betty Kennedy and all these people. They criticized this guy because he said, I'm an islander first, a maritime second, and a Canadian third. Okay? But his track record in service to this country is unbelievable. And I remember one time somebody came to CAB and they were looking for a whole bunch of grants and everything else, and he was sitting at the end of the table with a pipe, and he says, well, how would you describe yourself? He says, the person says, I'm an entrepreneur. And the premier says, an entrepreneur? You're putting up no money. You want us to put up all the guarantees. We're to build the buildings. Where's the risk in your part? He said, I didn't fight in Europe to have the best cream of our crop die over there for the likes of you to get government money. I just sort of sat there and what are you doing? Anyway, in case anyone doesn't know the story, the application was denied. Okay? And so somewhere along the line, guys, I want us to do a little bit of raw, what we can do. And I would like us, even those of us who have different points of view, to be able to say, what are some core values that we could agree upon? I feel that in part, I'm trying to educate people in this process, greater understanding. Like there was a woman last night in North Rustico. She came up to me at the end, she didn't say a single word on something that she has, and she says, you know, I just feel that this is almost one of the best events that's going across the province. And she says, I have somewhat changed my point of view. She says, have you noticed have I changed my points of view? Okay. And sometimes when people tell me everything, I encourage them to go off. There's this other commission that's going to start doing some work pretty soon, and I tell them they get lots of opportunity to go off and do it with them. I'm trying to do with something narrow here, okay? Now, one of the things that I am certainly going to recommend is that somehow we make it possible for some young farmers to somehow do their own thing. Last night we had a wonderful crop. There must have been 10 or 12. And one of my best times during this event was the middle of February, meeting with a dozen of them at the farm center. These are guys that, and gals, that they're young, between 25 and 35 plus, they want to farm, they're having problems getting land, they can't get land, they can't get good interest rates, they don't even know who owns the land and all that type of stuff, okay? And I called someone last night to give a little presentation, and I was so impressed with what Judy McDonald had to say, is she said, we need to be able to help these people. Okay? And to me, I hear a lot of, well, government should do this, and government should do that, but I'm saying, what can we do? And can we influence anything? You know, when I was a teenager and we went to a dance, you can, in this room, not here, you couldn't see across the floor. The floor. It was all blue smoke. But we changed that. Okay? We changed it. It was important. All right? So when do we start, as individual citizens, opening up our wallets to say that farming is important and saving our environment and our land is important? When do we do that? Okay, remember what I said. Angus says, if we want government to be all powerful to do certain things, then we have to be able to have so much power that they can take it away from us. You know, I'm a real Democrat. I am so strong in favor of democracy that I'm prepared to tolerate the most incompetent individual being elected at the polls. Because the next time, the incompetent fellow can get defeated. And it is a very humbling process to know that the electorate aren't always, on that occasion, on my side. But it's a wonderful experience to be able to have the opportunity to do something. And for me, I would like to make some certain specific suggestions, such as, during the Second World War, we issued victory bonds. Okay? What was the purpose? People put their hundreds of dollars and thousands of dollars into victory bonds to fight the Nazis because they believed that that was true. Okay? Some of those times those bonds were bought, the chances of us winning were close to nil, but we bought them. Okay? What if we were to provide a mechanism where we could buy land bonds? And we would take that money and we would buy vistas and viewscapes. We would buy development rights. Okay? We would make sure that Gordon Island over there in the Murray River, which used to be called Herring Island, where my ancestors used to live, could never be subdivided and this and that and everything else. Okay? And maybe we give special tax incentives to those people. See, we used to have a program in Prince of Island where people could lend the money to the government. Okay? It was called the Provincial Term Deposit. One of the first budget cabinets I was ever in, Angus MacLean asked the Treasury Secretary how much money was foreign owned, or, you know, like we borrowed. And I think it was only $50,000. And he said, we are never to borrow more foreign money outside of Canada. It's bad enough we pay interest, let alone we pay it to a foreign country and have to pay the exchange up and down. And he says, this little provincial deposit receipt organization, where you go and put in money and pay interest, we need to pay those people more. Because what they're basically saying is they have faith in the government. We pay them interest, and they spend the interest, and we keep it here. So what do we do? So then a government came along that was a political stripe. Should have had some association with me, but that government didn't listen to me always. In any event, so that particular Minister of Finance decided to cancel the program. And they canceled the program because we were paying Islanders too much interest. Okay? And so now what we do is we send all the interest away. It goes off island. Okay? So what I'm trying to suggest in some of this, folks, is this. If you think that I'm going to make only suggestions in which government is going to do this and do this and do that, you're wrong. I am going to make some suggestions and creative ideas, hopefully, that will provide the opportunity to government to say, hey, that's not bad. Let's try and have more buy-in. Let's have the opportunity to have some people, you're not getting any money in your GICs anyway, but maybe land or viewscapes and viscous or do something like that, okay? Now, another thing that I'm very supportive of is land banking. Someone talked before of the LDC, and I think that has a role, but I think it needs to be expanded. I had to be, for personal reasons, family reasons, be in the state of Maine the other weekend. And at the Surrey meeting, Ray Keenan, Alvin's brother, got up and started talking about PBYN, how disastrous it was. It was disastrous, and the thing that ticked me off about that was that I never felt the federal scientists were sufficiently wrapped and whatever in the law firm that I was associated at the time. We were the people representing the farmers up in Brunswick and successful eventually in having a settlement in that particular matter. And then I interjected to Ray, and he said the markets were closed immediately in Maine. I said, it just shows the power of politics. That here, George Mitchell, he's the head of the Democrats in the Senate. He's from Maine, so what he was able to do, just like that, he had the Maine border closed, just like that. Okay, so when we were in Bangor on the weekend, we checked, and in Portland, we checked into the hotel, and I'm checking there in the hotel, and there's a TV camera over there interviewing someone. I checked in and look around, and who walks by me? But George Mitchell. The very person I was talking about a few days ago in Surrey. I said, that'll teach me not about talking about an American politician. But anyway, I picked up the Maine newspaper. And in the Maine newspaper, it talks about this farm family that are fifth or sixth family generations. But they've got to the point that their land is so valuable for development. And they're taxed so heavy, they can't afford to pay the taxes. The father's getting older. The son wants to take over. Okay? They can't do it. Can't afford it. Banks don't want to lend you money in land unless you got lots of capital and equity. They want lots of security. Okay? So what they did in the state of Maine, they issued a bond. And people could donate and lend to the government. Get tax receipt, get good benefits, and then the people that have the bond, the government, they come along and they buy the father's developmental rights. And then the son can take over the farm, not at the price. And so everyone's protected. The father gets some retirement funds. The son gets to do what he really wants to love to do. The land is farmed appropriately. And guess what? The other thing happens. The Mainite people are able to contribute some of their money and they can buy into the program. Anyway, I decided that I would say a few of these things because I thought that we'd just go a different way for a moment, okay? All right, now, enough of me, and we're going to have a few more minutes of this, and then we're going to wrap it up in 20 at the outside, and I'll listen to you, whatever. And so, Mr. McKinnon, I was extremely impressed with your comments in Montague. Do you have anything to say?
Probably not, that was quite low.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, just to go back to the old LDC program, that's how Christine and I got our first home.
Okay.
That's how we got our first home. Just at that time, the farm home that I live in now wasn't available, and it. So anyway.
And so do you think that has a role again?
Definitely so. I don't know, it was quite a kick in the butt when that role diminished and was diminished and canceled. We were given the ultimatum either buy the house or give up our lease. Because the program, they weren't going to lease it to us anymore.
I often wondered whether it had something to do with whether possibly, and I just speculate out loud, whether there were federal dollars in that. You know, sometimes we sort of look upon these federal dollars a little differently than we look upon the provincial dollars. They're sort of not ours, but you know, as I like to say, I have to fill my return in a couple of weeks' time. One coin going two different places, actually. Anyway, so I don't know. But do you think that there's a place for that type of program to gain, even expand it?
I do, you know, my real concern, and I don't have an answer for it, Horace, I don't have an answer for it, but what we're up against in this province is a real lack of succession planning, and there is, you know, the old age-old adage is, if you're standing still, you're going behind, and that's why, you know, people like Alvin and myself and Bertha have all grown. You know, I worked with Bertha's husband when he had, you know, a pen full of pigs to pay his way through university. You know, and that's how we both started, and we started and we grew. And it's all about critical mass and getting the most of your physical plant and all those things. And we grew at our place to make room for another generation to come along. But, you know, there's other people that grew beyond me, and there's just, even in the dairy industry, we've grown these physical plants to the point where there's no succession plans in a lot of our large dairy farms, and they're, you know, the capital that's tied up in them, and there's just, you know, even in our own organization with the amount of capital we got tied up in it, even the cash flow of the next generation coming in takes, as you say, sacrifices. You know, Christine and I have to sacrifice some of our lifestyle to allow our son to do what my previous generation allowed us to do. You know, I had no wonder farming was something that I always wanted to do. When people said, you did your engineering degree to have something to fall back on, I said, no, I did an engineering degree to do something to go ahead on. to go ahead on. And, you know, as I said before, we've got 3 engineering degrees in our household and a science degree coming in behind us. And that's what we need to keep these businesses afloat. But the guys that are bigger than us, succession planning is a problem. And if the province could pitch in to help that situation be what it may, somewhere, somehow, we're going to come up against a cement wall with our...
So it's the problem, Dan, is that these farms have gotten too big, that nobody can...
Well, they're going to be a problem to pass them on. Even
So every time we increase the land limits, then we're piling on the problem.
We should all become monks.
Well, they're buying lots of land.
Yes. Miss Loloshaw, is it?
Actually, I'm more now.
Okay.
Kind of on that topic. I am a resident of Hetterdale.
Yes.
And I have a concern in my community that there is a group of individuals, and this is just by hearsay or general observation that I know this, that there's a group of individuals that have purchased at least what I believe to be at least 8 homes in my community. And to this, well, up until this point, the property that is next to our property, it was purchased last year in March, and it's not being taken care of. And many of the other properties in our community are also not being either lived in or being taken care of. And kind of, I think Trudy, is it Trudy? She mentioned how she has 8 students in her grade 1 class in 2013. And I would suggest that I am probably the only person under 30 in my community. And last year, we considered relocating closer to the city, but we enjoy our community and we like it. But now, this past summer, we actually built a piece on our house to improve it and to improve to improve our life. And now I'm kind of regretting that decision, because the property that I live next to was formerly a beautiful property, and last year the grass was cut one time.
And so these residences, they're just left vacant, are they? Or?
It appears to be. So this is just general observation. They don't seem to be lived in, or very seldom lived in. And I just find it a concern, and I think that it's important that at least, that when land is exchanged, that, or if there are some bylaws, I'm a very novice. I don't know anything really about what
Never
I'm talking
admit that.
about.
There are always those that tell you that, but never admit it.
I do find it a real concern, and kind of what Trudy said, we have down, our population is falling. My other half doesn't work on Prince Edward Island, he works away. And sustainability, I think it's a concern.
Yeah. Well, you have raised so many different issues all over the place there, and so forth. And I'll come back to what I was going to turn to get, but I'll come back there in a moment. People make certain references, oblique references and so forth, but for people to buy property, somebody has to be prepared to sell property. And if we are suggesting that nobody is able to sell property unless it goes through a certain process, that's a pretty blanket statement that has a lot of ramifications. But the whole matter of keeping up appearances and landscape and so forth like this is, for about 12, 14 years of my life, I was the vice president and the president of Rural Beautification Society. It's something that's pretty close to me. And I know the importance and the value of landscape and sense of pride and so forth. But it gets back to, we may criticize someone for buying, but if we don't buy and we want to put restrictions against someone selling, that's where it sort of all leads to, okay? It really does. And, there are laws in this province about dilapidated premises. The worst thing about that, because I used to be the minister 1 year for that, is from what I could see at that time, the dilapidated premise has to get so totally bad that it's almost, whatever. Now, there were various reasons why I wanted to come to Murray Harbour. Personal reasons. And I just thought it was an area that sometimes gets somewhat overlooked. However, in item 3 of this little quiz that we're all conducting tonight, it says that the last 7 or 8 words, and that legislative, and the first sentence says, legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as, and then you go drop down to the third line, and the information and deeming requirements for non-profit corporations. Is that some people think that if you're a non-profit corporation, that there's no limit to the amount of land that you can buy. Such is not the case. Okay? Such is not the case. Scott?
Are you sure?
Yes.
It seems like they've got carried away with this scenario. And property values are dropping.
Well, we
Her property is dropped in value.
Yeah, we put on $150,000 addition to our house, and the day the windows went in it, the tax man was there knocking on our door to ask, what was being built and what was going to be in that addition on the home. And to be quite frank and honest, I don't feel like paying a cent more in tax dollars if the property beside me is depreciating my home.
Well, what's your first name?
Jennifer.
Jennifer, in about 6 weeks' time, your tax bill is going to come out. Okay?
It's gonna be up.
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
And
Now,
I understand that.
now, one could say this is free legal advice, but you have to understand, the free legal advice is worth, as John Diefenbaker said, what you pay for it, okay? So now this is what I would do if I were you, is that I would turn my bill over, and I will see a section there about notice of appeal. And I would put a notice of appeal in, and I would explain the various points, okay? And you send it in to them, and the tax appeal section, they don't like appeals, okay? So they're going to come out and they're going to talk to you and see if they can do certain things with you and whatever the case. You just tell it the way it is. And what that's going to do is going to make you feel as if you did something, okay? Even if you go through the appeal process, that's fine. It's not going to cost anything. You can do it yourself. Your father is not a shy man, and your mother's even more vocal. She worked in law office. She knows how to do certain things, or even do it yourself, okay? So that's what you should do. Now, coming back to this point here, you say, am I sure? Yes, I am sure. Is that non-profit corporations have restrictions on the amount of land they can buy. Okay? Now, there are some reasonably well-known non-profit corporations. Okay? And there was the Island Nature Trust, and it was having problems because it got up to the limits. But then government came along and they exempted most of their properties because they're environmentally sensitive. My grandparents went to the little Christian church down in Murray Harbour, Beach Point. I go to the Baptist church in Charlottetown. They're all non-profit. And above 5 acres, we have to apply to IRAC. We have limits and all that type of stuff. But the difference between a non-profit corporation and a profit corporation is that when they make their application for IRAC approval for non-profit, because there are no shareholders in a non-profit corporation, IRAC has no indication of who the members are, okay, of that organization. Now, you can say, well, we should know who the members are of these non-profit organizations. Let's be a little careful. That's going down a road that has a lot of questions about the type of society in which we live in. Okay? Now, sometimes some people think that non-profit organizations own a whole bunch of land, but sometimes individuals who are members of the non-profit organization own the land in their own right. And if they are residents of the province, then they have the right to own it, just like every resident here. Okay? Which gets to my perpetual question that I ask at most of these meetings, which is something like this. I own no land. Okay? I own no shares in any private company that owns land in Prince Rupert. My wife owns half an acre land. Okay? Now I enjoy life. I appreciate the beauty and the serenity and the pastoral aspect. I'm very concerned with the future of this province. I said to my wife in the last couple of years, she said, you're concerned about stuff. I got to talk about different things. I said, I can't explain it. This is like 18 months, 2 years ago. I cannot explain it, but I am of the opinion, I said a couple of years ago to her, that we are going through something here in this province that I can't describe. I feel it in my gut, I feel it in my heart,
It's very true.
and I feel in my head that we are going through a revolution in this province called change. And where the change is all going to be when it's all said, I don't know. I have no idea. Quite often we're afraid of change. but we don't want to live in the dark ages again, and we don't want to live like my grandparents necessarily lived. But those things that are important and valuable to us, we need to come together. And those organizations and those individuals that could ever be creative and bring others on side with different points of view, that might impress the commission a lot when I'm doing my report. Okay? Now, back to the land and the nonprofit organizations. So, how can we do anything more about that? I don't know. But this is my question. This is my personal Horace Carver question. Why does Horace Carver, a Charlottetown lawyer, need to have the right to own 1,000 acres of land in Prince Valley? Why do I need that right? I'm not a farmer. I don't own the land because I'm developing it. I don't want to rent it out to people. I don't own any land. Okay? And people get concerned about some of the stuff that you're talking about, Jennifer, and other things, but they think the Lands Protection Act is just protecting them, and they're just so they can sleep perfectly like a baby at night. I told you enough earlier in the evening. That's not the case. So maybe I should lower the limits for certain things. And maybe we should look at how we deal with certain protections of certain land. And we have to be careful. It's not just the land, it's the water. It's the forests. Okay? Anyway, I've done enough talking, but I just wanted to take us down a certain way, and I don't really mean to touch us off at all. But anyone want to comment on what I've been saying or rambling about or whatever? Scott, you came from Stratford tonight down here.
There's only one point I want to correct, Jen.
Okay.
Don't ever file for an appeal.
Why?
When you work in real estate, you take no sides. And I always found that people that fought hard to keep their taxes down, eventually they're going to want to sell it. And when you have an assessment of $70,000 on a $140,000 piece of property, it just doesn't work.
Well, let me put it this way. I was trying to look at Jennifer's point of view and having your tax bill down. Now, if you want me to argue the other side of the coin, I'll also give you some free advice. I say to my wife every year, she opens the tax, oh, and then somebody else, I said, I just want our neighbors to sell their homes for the most amount of money they can.
Right. Oh,
so I can argue both sides of the coin.
I know. It's great, isn't it?
Darlene, you have something to say you'd like to say.
Well, you know I'm not a farmer, so, people who don't know, we have 80 acres on the Ponds Road in Pennant.
This is Darlene and Russ Company.
Yes. I was in McCrae, it's been in the family since 1836. When we purchased it from my dad's youngest brother, they were farming Monsanto Roundup beans. And Horace has known our family for a long time. Our daughter Katie, her eyes got this big, and she's a science writer in Ottawa, so she knows about what goes on and what goes through the Department of Health federally. And her eyes got really big. She said, you're not going to farm the land with Monsanto Roundup. And we made the decision not to do that. But we have wonderful friends who are farmers, and we know the concern of like trying to make a living and trying to stay ahead. But we are a small province, and my question, and I guess my vision that I put forward to Horace is, if we increase the limits for land for farmers, is that the vision we want for PEI? We're a small province, we can cut down the hedgerows, it makes the parcel of land a little bit bigger, but we don't have any more land, and we can't compete with farmers in Saskatchewan. We can't compete with commodity, is my concern. And again, I'm not a farmer, so I'm sure you can argue that point. But I think there has to be a better way, and if you look to Europe and the way they value their food, we've lived overseas, and one example I use is when we lived in the Middle East, we bought beef from Australia because we knew they had regulations in place, which we have in Canada, which we want, right? We want to have regulations, we want to know our food is safe. But we go to Sobeys and we buy something. One example I use is my aunt, who was 95 at the time, is feeding me lunch, And she put the bottle of pickles on the table that she bought and apologized, and I read it, and they were made in India. And I said, what's wrong with this picture? We're eating pickles from India, and they're cheaper than pickles from PEI or Canada. And also, we lived in Indonesia, and there was a huge problem at the time of the shrimp catch was being preserved in formaldehyde. And that's what we're eating, you know, so until people value what they put in their mouths, I think it's really hard to change, you know, the commodity farming versus, you know, we talk about the number of SKUs for potatoes and the variety of food that's available. Why can we not grow a bigger variety here and become a little more specialized? And I'm sure there are a number of reasons and a number of arguments against that. But I think we also have to look at diversifying the market. And also, you know, you argue you have to be competitive and stay ahead, but yet you make yourself so big that you can't succession plan. You can't. Young farmers can't afford to start up. We assume because that's what's happening. So what is the answer? So my vision is, again, Angus MacLean said, and I reread the book a number of times, but you know, we're stewards of the land, and we need to leave it in the same shape it was, or better shape than you know, than we received it. So that's what I put forward. You know, my concern is increasing the land limit the right focus for PEI. And I know there are probably a million arguments why and why not, but it's a concern for us. We have 80 acres and 65 of it is farmed. We lease the land, and you know, was basically raped, if we want to put it that way, no nutrients, and we've tried to bring it back, and I would love to see it. You know, you say organic, and that creates a big, you know, we can't do that, but if we all have a focus of how do we make the land better than it was, you know, or better than it is, you know, that's my vision.
You know what the real problem is? There's money in food. That's the problem, and that's where the multinationals and the corporations see big profits is in food. And that's why supply management has been attacked in Canada, is because the pie is divided up with the farmer in thought. And you read about it all the time in the Globe and Mail. You must read about it first. You read the Globe every day, which I do, and that's why these economists and these people are attacking the system, is because there is no chaos in the system of supply management. There is problems with quota prices and whatnot, but the big thing here, there's money in food, and look at the way China is buying up land in Africa. There's the answer there. It's about, if you own land, you are wealthy. Back to the serfs where was the system in the Northern Hemisphere for hundreds of years.
Trudy?
Unfortunately, with the large-scale monoculture, the money in food is a really small margin per acre. And what Darlene's saying, and I think what you'd agree, is, you know, with some diversification, you can make a lot more money off of a lot smaller piece of land. You can make that land produce more if you keep it healthy. My daughter-in-law is small farm, getting into farming in a very small way. Last year she did community-supported agriculture. She did 15 veggie deliveries a week. This year she has a baby, so she's not working on another job. She decided she would double that to 30. She put it on Facebook. She could have done 100 veggie. Low people would pay for local, organically produced vegetables. But she's, well, it's great.
It's great.
It's wonderful. I'd like to put on a different hat, and I'm going to try and be really brief.
Okay, you put on a different hat.
I also am a farmer, farming 30, 40, close to 40 years. Got our start with nothing, rented some LDC land so that we could grow enough hay for our cattle. We own a milk and honey farm. And so I'm going to put my beekeeper's hat on, because a few people raised bees and pollinators today, and the importance. Because without them, we're not going to have a lot of our vegetables. And monoculture is really hard on bees, because they're little insects and they need a varied diet. They need good nutrition. They're hard to keep alive. You know, we're there. Right now, we keep 3,200 hives. And I know the Federation is proud of the fact that they just helped modernize, I think that's the way you modernized beekeeping practices on PEI, but what you've done is you've opened the border to tracheal mites. You've helped open the border to tracheal mites to come in and infect local pollinators. So we're going to see pollinators going down, not just the ones that are kept for the next little while, but they'll get over it. Through a natural selection, they'll develop a resistance. Okay, but for a while, and they need them for blueberries, I agree, and unfortunately blueberries have expanded really fast, and there are vast acreages, and there's no pollinators in those acreages. They have to bring bees in to pollinate, because they don't live there. They also don't live in potatoes, which is lucky because they don't pollinate potatoes, so they don't get infected or they don't get killed by the systemic pesticides. We hope they don't get to corn. They do pollinate canola. I mean, my husband works very closely with farmers all over eastern PEI in order to find bee pastures and to try and keep the bees alive. Beekeeping's changed. Throughout the states, that's all you do. That's all they do now, is keep bees alive. That's what you do.
Is he Mr. Sadler?
That's my husband. We're the Milk and Honey Farm. And he couldn't be here tonight.
No, well, I've watched him on television.
Yes.
Listened to him on television.
Yeah, unfortunately, we do have to keep our pollinators healthy. And we do need pollinators for all of our crops, or most of them, not all of them. But most of them.
A third of our food.
A third of our food. And if they pick up pesticides in watercourses, it's hard on them. If they pick them up being expressed in pollen, it's hard on them. If they have tracheal mites, which are little microscopic spiders which crawl in through their spiracles, through their breathing holes, set up residents, live and breed in their trachea. There can be as many as 20, 25 of them living in a bee's trachea. They suck the lymph out of the bee and eventually weaken the bee and eventually weaken the hive so that it dies. They're never going to go away.
Thank you,
We're going to have them.
Now, people should look at a dandelion as a weed. They are
Because
the
it's
first food
for
of
pollen.
the
Yeah, they're wonderful.
pollinators of the season.
You're 100% right. Your dandelion is the best thing you can grow. You use the roots, you use the stems, you use the leaves, and you use the flower.
It could be a crop.
And there's people in Cornwall, I think, that are growing dandelions and shipping them all to China, so the bio-remitted dandelions we have. But they have to be organic.
I think
So we need some biodiversity.
Okay, thank you. No? Do you have anything to
No.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. This is not deck of cards. This is where you can send me a note in the mail. You don't need one. You already sent me two. But if you'd like to take a card, please do. And thank you. And so far, I'll just leave them there. I'd like to thank you. Thank you very much for coming tonight. You're never sure when you come to a particular community how many are going to be here. And I just like to thank you. I appreciate it. And as I've said a couple of times, this is a special community for me. I look forward to hearing from you again. We have meetings on April the 8th in Charlottetown at the Rod Charlottetown Hotel. If you get a chance, I'd encourage you to come to that meeting. The last time we had about 70 people. It was absolutely fascinating. And thanks very much. Appreciate the time. And the following night, we're going to be at Crapple. Everyone's asking when we're going to be at Crapple. Well, we're going to be at Crapple on Tuesday the 9th. And Bertha, were you going to say something? Or? No. And then it's a storm date for Crapple is the 10th at Englewood School. And we have a storm date picked for April the 15th at the Charlottetown Hotel. The way I'm feeling is just hearing people wanting to make presentations, comments. I think that we're going to have that as another date for Charlottetown the 15th. And the way I'm going to operate in both Crapple and in Charlottetown is that those individuals and organizations who have never spoken are going to have the first opportunity to speak. And then We are probably going to do something that they do in the Supreme Court of Canada. Give you a very short period of time to make your point. When I go to court for a chambers application, win in front of a couple of judges, Mr. Carpenter, you have got 30 minutes or 20 minutes to express your point of view. I want to hear you in 15 and 20 minutes, and then questions are back and forth, okay? So that's sort of where we're at. But we have had literally hundreds of individuals come out in this process. And I'm pretty proud of the process. But I was the one that conceived it. Like Angus used to say, mothers proudest of their own inventions. All right, thank you.
Thank you.